Fringe Crew, what's up? It's Robbie and Elizabeth with Goth History. Episode 2.
Well, for this one, I was a little bit confused about where to start, and I think the last video I got up to maybe 1986. So I'd like to go back to the 70s. And you can even go back before the 70s. There's a lot of things we can talk about, and I'm really excited that has to do with Goth aesthetic. There's like cinema, there's literature, it goes on, clothing, fashion even, it goes on and on. But the music is what I want to talk about because it's extremely important to the subculture, of course. And it's a very rich and varied musical history. It's been divided into as many as 16 musical subcultures, main subcultures. And this is just a minimum. And there are other ones that just keep going. Hold on, can you stop for a second?
I can cut it out.
Okay, cut
That's
it
fine.
out. All right. In 1979, there was a journalist named Martin Hannett, and he described Joy Division as dancing music with Gothic overtones. And that's the first time that they had used that description, really. He went to, Goth music. But it was actually kind of an insult and a term of abuse, and they would describe anyone after, say, Joy Division and Zusie and the Banshees, who were pretty much concurrent. Anyone after that, like Bauhaus, who was considered the first Gothic, real true Gothic band, on their own, and aesthetically defined and musically define a lot of what is goth rock now. So their roots also, you could even go back to glam. David Bowie is a very popular goth icon. Iggy Pop even, Alice Cooper. There's a lot of that can be said about that. But for me, back then, I would have to go to someone's house and go through their record collection, physically pick up a record. And I was introduced to, say, Kraftwerk. There were nerds and goths kind of go hand in hand, especially with music. And a lot are musicians, very creative people. So Kraftwerk is very early, 1970. And actually, I don't know if you can see this, one of their very first 1975 records, and it just has two men, and it shows on the back their synthesizers, most of them are homemade, and they, and then this is, of course, their Trans-Euro Express, which all paved the way, also, so I didn't have much money, so to learn about music, I relied on my musical friends, who were also, some of those were also computer nerds, and they were building synthesizers in their rooms. And so I would go over there and hang out. We just hung out with people. We spent time with people. And so I would hang out with the computer nerds, and they would build their own synthesizers and make their own music. And I would learn a lot about, say, industrial, Throbbing Gristle. I also worked in a record store and learned a lot about that. Also, the early industrial music with synthesizers, that kind of thing. there was a magazine that my friends had because I didn't have any money, so like they would bring it over and we would look through it. It was NME, which is New Music Express, and this was a British magazine, and so it would take a while to get it. But my friends who were really music nerds, you know, you learned a lot about that. And so in a lot about goth. They kind of started talking about goth musicians before there was the word goth. So like in 1979, they interviewed Joy Division. Of course, in 1980, Ian Curtis took his own life, and Joy Division was no more. So, and that splintered off into something else, New Order. Susie and the Banshees, Sex Gang Children, which are from the Bat Cave in London. They were called in 1982 positive punk, you know. So there was a definite 1970s punk, but by the late 1970s, punk had really gone commercial, and that's like when I started to hear it because I was younger and didn't have a lot of the resources in, say, 79 through, 83. And then I just dove right into it. And I learned from this magazine, from my friends. Record collections were so important, and I did work at a couple of record stores, which really helped. So, these two. Joy Division, and this t-shirt, I'm sure you can buy this t-shirt at Hot Topic. Yes. This is 1979 Unknown Pleasures with, of course, She's Lost Control, which we did dance to. Interestingly enough, you can dance to it. 1980 Closer with Heart and Soul, Isolation, and then, of course, that was put out in 1980, so Ian Curtis killed himself in May 18th. And many things happened after he killed himself. It actually had a very big impact on goth music, was his suicide, because it was like tragic, but also, I don't know, very dramatic at the same time because of the way he had staged it with like playing Iggy Pop's Idiot on his record player. It was just, I don't know. But anyway, so in 1978, Susie and the Banshees, who was actually considered punk, and then later on like positive punk, and then maybe post-punk, which kind of all just happened. And a lot of this actually happened at the same time. Like, for instance, in 1979, you had Los Angeles Death Rock. That was going on in Los Angeles. You had the Bat Cave going on. That was a little bit late in 1982 with Specimen, Alien Sex Gang Children, and they were doing the Bat Cave London, which a lot of goths just bow down to the Bat Cave. But what they don't realize about the Bat Cave is that first of all, it was a club, but it moved around. They just never could really find the right space, and there was a lot of, there were a lot of fishnets and black and hair and dyed hair and things like that, but there were also not a lot of them, so, I mean, it did kind of set the aesthetic for like leather and lace maybe, but anyway, so 1979, Bela Lugosi's dead. Bauhaus releases this single. It's a 12-inch. They only made like 5,000 copies, I think. So that's why I don't have one, I guess, unless I get like a reprint. But anyway, it was 9 minutes long, and it is a goth anthem. And Bauhaus just kind of fucking happened, and so that came out in 79. Their first album came out, I think, a year later. In the Flat Field in 1980. Susie and the Banshees, Juju, came out in 1981. That was also a definitive goth album, which I do not think I have. Interesting enough, also, some some goths want to debate about this. In 1979, The Cure happened, whatever, formed. And in 1980, this is like the trio, the Cure trio for Cure fans. 17 Seconds in 1980 with The Forest, which is a masterpiece. 1981, Faith, which has a lot of awesome stuff on it. And 1982, Pornography, which is one of the most amazing albums ever. So those are like the three early Cure. And the Cure were called post-punk, not goth. And so then at the same time you also had like Echo and the Bunnymen. Let's see. Also, I do want to mention one of my favorite bands is Skinny Puppy. And Skinny Puppy came out in 1982. And I remember 1985, their Bites album came out, and we had a DJ who was very forward-thinking. I'm still a friend of his on Facebook. But he had a copy of Bites, and he played Assimilate. And that, like, you know, we danced to that, and that, like, just rocked my world. There's a very big history of industrial in Canada. And it's going on today, and there's like all kinds of information I can share about that, but I won't go into it now. 1983, Sisters of Mercy, Andrew Eldritch. They used a drum machine instead of a drummer. They did a 12-inch, which I do have, Temple of Love, which I had that same 12-inch back then. And I didn't even have a record player, but I had a record player. I would go take it to other people's houses and play on their record players. So, anyway. 1983, the movie The Hunger. I didn't probably see it until 84, till I got to college. But we would, this was a very, it opened with Bauhaus in a cage, Peter Murphy in Goth. Full goth. I mean, it's so goth, and the whole movie is goth, and it's a goth cult film, and it's based on a book. Whitney Strieber, I think, is his name, and it came into McKay's, and I failed to get it, but anyway. So Bauhaus, you can just Google that. 1983, The Hunger, Peter Murphy, or Bauhaus, and you can watch that. Also, Bauhaus, like right after that, broke up. So there's like a lot of drama with Peter Murphy going off to a solo career, and Love and Rockets, Daniel Ash doing Tones on Tail, which in 1984, Go was another 12-inch I had. Love and Rockets, which is mainly post-punk, in 1985. I'm not going to go past 1985 right now. And then, of course, 1983, you have more of your cowboy goth, and you have the big long coats, maybe leather, with the Southern Death Cult, who became Death Cult, and then the Cult, with She Sells Sanctuary, which was another 12-inch, which I have right here. I have these are all my early ones. So, we have Gothic rock, and there are actually some goths who don't like Gothic music. There are some goths who are so purist that they think you must know the music history. And they also think that if you're interested in goth, you're going to just kind of seek that out naturally or whatever. But that's what I guess I did, but you don't have to, because there's so many different categories of goth. There's one for everybody. I mean, and you don't have to, and these were all happening pretty much simultaneously from the late 70s on to the early 80s, and then but they were still playing Bela Lugosi Was Dead, even though it was released on a 12-inch in 1979. We were dancing to it in 1985, 86. So you have death rock from the 1970s, and it splinters on to you even have industrial metal, which someone puts Marilyn Manson in. And Marilyn Manson's a whole show on itself. That's a debate, very big debate. I don't want to say what side I'm on right now. But anyway, so, you even have, say you have the New Romantics from the early 70s, late 70s, early 80s that even influenced it, like Adam Ant. Who was also originally called Punk when he first came out. So anyway, Goth has always tried to do things differently, and they're usually, a lot of this has been a reaction to, say, really shiny pop that was going on, or maybe disco. You have the punk, rebellious nature that continues, anti-mediocrity, want to be different, all that. It's all over, and there's so many, and I would recommend, I'm going to end this pretty soon, and I've got so much to talk about later. This is a book that is, if you want to learn more about Goth, I recommend it, and I want to try, this is French, Lisa Latacour.
We'll put a link in the
Anyway,
description.
she's Canadian, and she's a Goth journalist, and she wrote this book, and it's amazing. It's called the Encyclopedia Gothica. But what I really like it, and she does go into other genres, such there as dark wave, cold wave. That's anyway, she goes into it, and at the very back, which I've made copies of for my friends, if I can get to it, is she made a goth band tree. And it starts at the top with punk, new romantics, and industrial, but it goes all the way to EDM, synth pop, dark cabaret, which, is interesting, gothic metal, dark wave, ethereal, which we loved ethereal too. So, see, we loved all, when I look at this map, this tree, it's all interconnected. Like, you've got the Cramps with Psychobilly, and we were listening to them. We had a Cramps record. I had a Damned, I had a Susie and the Banshees, I had Cabaret Voltaire. We weren't really snobby about these different. We weren't really snobby about these different. It was all so exciting, and it was all happening almost at the same time, but sometimes it was in reaction. But there is a dark, maybe doom, gloom underneath it, but also an incredible creative spirit. It is amazing. And if you just, you touch upon one and you're just going down a rabbit hole, and that, so anyway, these were the ones that were important to me. But like I said, they've remained goth anthems in a way, and I think everyone should at least just listen to them once. And if you can, there's all kinds of interesting things to Google, like Peter Murphy, who of course doesn't claim to be goth. Andrew Eldritch of the Sisters of Mercy, he even claims to not be goth. But I don't know if I said this, but that one of the oldest goth jokes, if you're a goth, you're not going to say you're a goth. You're going to deny being a goth or whatever. Susie Sue denies it. Peter Murphy, and these are the people who set the aesthetic with the makeup and just even the dry ice, everything. The dramatical, like Bauhaus, for instance, was known for their dramatical stage presence, and so you had a lot of this really interesting mingle with art going on at the same time. So anyway, I guess that's it, and I'm going to stop there at about 1983, maybe 84, 85. And anyway, that's it. We'll continue. There's so much to talk
We'll
about.
see you next episode.